The competitive world of offshore sailing is a grueling place to sail and is, for the most, the domain of the professional elite. But making up a trio of classic offshore battles is the Rolex Middle Sea Race. It's an event that unites seasoned campaigners with intrepid first-timers and takes place against the backdrop of some of the most stunning scenery our sport has to offer. For the last 5 decades, it started and finished in the current European capital of culture, Valletta, and this year's unique edition draws a record 130 entries from 29 countries.
This month on Mainsail, we're on the beautiful island of Malta, celebrating the 50th anniversary of one of offshore sailing's most iconic races.
It's one of the jewels of the Mediterranean Sea, an island with a rich history dating back thousands of years, a cultural gem lying almost equidistant between the great landmasses of Europe and Africa.
It is, of course, the beautiful island of Malta. And this month on Mainsail, we've come to the stunning Mediterranean island as they celebrate a milestone edition of one of offshore sailing's landmark races.
For 50 years, some of the sport's biggest names have been coming here to navigate what has often been called the most beautiful racecourse in sailing, all bidding to win the much coveted Rolex Middle Sea Race.
This is one of the top ocean races in the world in terms of, you got the Fastnet and you've got the Hobart for shore, but, for an exciting ocean race in the Med, this is as good as it gets.
Those of us that like offshore racing just love to do this race. It's one of those races, it's on every sailor's calendar. When you ask people, have you heard about the Middle Sea Race? And the answer is, who hasn't?
Sailed on a course of just over 600 nautical miles, the race takes in some of the most stunning scenery the Mediterranean has to offer, but it's no sightseeing tour. Last year, less than half the boats finished the race. This is a course with a real sting in its tail.
This race can be very, very difficult. The wind can change very fast all the time and can be half of the race with no wind and then half of the race with a big storm, so you never know.
It's a full-on ocean race, even if we are in the Med, because when you get, in very open stretch of water, you get, 30 knots, 5 meters waves.
Every time you get around the next corner, you think you're home free, but very often that's not the case, and you'll have another big shift or another obstacle to overcome.
The origins of this magnificent spectacle hark back to the late 1960s, and like many long-established yacht races, lie in the friendly rivalries between two yacht clubs. First raced in 1968, the challenge saw 8 boats take part, and a win for the Dutch boat Strongvogel. But it's since grown into one of the sport's most prestigious offshore races.
The Middle Sea Race now is really very big. We've got people from all over the world. 600-mile offshore challenge, and it's up there with the major events.
While a resident of Malta in the 1960s, Alan Green was instrumental in the first edition of the race. Representing the British-based Royal Ocean Racing Club, he challenged the local Royal Malta Yacht Club to race around the local islands, and the idea escalated from there.
Alan, talk to me about the origins of this race. How did it all begin?
Well, back in 1968, I was working here as a civil servant. I met a friend here. We sailed together, and came October, and a lot of the boats laid up, and we thought, well, this is strange, because now the weather's getting windy, it's still warm. Why don't we keep sailing? Well, we did keep sailing, and we thought, this has got to be a fantastic area for a great race. There aren't many races that sail around 2 volcanoes. I think there may be one in New Zealand that has 1, but we have 2 in this race, which is really brilliant. I mean, you're sailing around Stromboli, and at night you'll see the red eruption bubbling away at the top of the volcano. And that's pretty mind-blowing if you're not used to sailing around volcanoes.
The race soon gathered momentum, initially attracting yachts from Italy, the UK, and then the rest of the world, all congregating in this stunning setting to take on this uniquely beautiful offshore challenge that encompasses the true spirit of sailing.
Well, it's the love of the sea. We all love to sail. We have always compared this race with the Fastnet and the Sydney to Hobart. I think when it was first conceived, it was planned to be the same length as the Fastnet, with aspirations, I imagine, to be as big as that. 50 years is a milestone. It's a special year because it means that the race has kept its appeal over the years. So we are quite confident that it will retain its appeal and keep on growing.
A lot has changed since those early days of racing here in the Mediterranean. In part two, we'll be looking at the 21st century racing machines, hoping to claim this prestigious title. But before then, here's a quick look at what else has been going on in the world of sailing this month.
The penultimate act of the Extreme Sailing Series went right down to the wire. A double points decider seeing Team Oman Air lift the trophy in San Diego. After a consistent week, crossing the finish line in second behind Switzerland's Alinghi was enough to secure Oman Air their first act win of the year. But it's the Swiss crew who still lead the overall rankings, with the season finale in Mexico next month. And the annual World Sailing Awards have taken place in Florida. The highlight was a presentation for Rolex Male and Female World Sailors of the Year. The Netherlands' Caroline Brouwer and Marie Rieu of France were recognised for becoming the first women to win the gruelling Volvo Ocean Race, while Cypriot Pavlos Kontidis was rewarded for his consecutive Laser World Championship titles, having taken the top step on the podium in Croatia in 2017 and again in Denmark just 3 months ago. This month on Mainsail, we're on the Mediterranean island of Malta to celebrate the anniversary of one of offshore sailing's most prestigious events.
For the last 50 years, the Middle Sea Race has started and finished in the grand harbour of the island's capital, Valletta. And it's from this stunning setting that over 130 boats will head out for over 600 miles of challenging offshore racing.
The fleet this year is the largest it's ever been. The esteem of the 50th anniversary regatta attracting some stunning entries. The largest of which is the stylish 115-foot super yacht Nakata. Sleek Italian design fused with impeccable Finnish build quality makes this 3-year-old yacht a sight to behold. But don't be fooled by her sleek lines. With a theoretical top speed of 28 knots, she's a real mix of luxury and speed. Although generally the domain of the monohull, this edition of the race also sees 2 of the world's fastest offshore racing multi-hulls going head-to-head. And in the right conditions, there's a chance they could be first home.
This kind of boat, they don't like short waves and deep sea. And obviously here, when you go around Sicily, if there is a lot of wind, most of the time you have this kind of condition. The sea state is very bad for us. It's short and deep, and so you have to be careful. Until you finish, you never know what happened. Well, it's normal that the multi-hull is first back, but this race is tricky because most of the time, half of the race, there is no wind, and so the multi-hull is not so fast with no wind. But then once there is the wind, it's no problem. I think this time I feel confident.
Maserati takes to this race with a proven offshore record. She's quick in the wind. Earlier this year, she broke the Hong Kong to London record by axing almost a week off the existing time, completing the 15,000-mile route in just over 36 days. But this year she has company. A newly repackaged Mod 70 racing trimaran is in Malta for their first excursion into offshore racing.
We got a new owner who's very excited. We're sailing again together as a team after a little period of no sailing. So we're all getting back to grips with it. We've got a Maserati to play with, and she's got all the bells and whistles. We're not quite sure how we're going to match up against her. So it's really turning into potentially a very, very exciting race.
Well, I had a lot of trepidation when I first got on the boat. I have to say it was because it is a machine, and you do 35 knots, 36 knots, and I have to say when I first started, it was like, whoa, you know, but it's such a sensitive boat. You know, you've got such a leverage on the tiller. It's very easy to handle, and you just get this incredible feeling. It's almost, I fly a plane too, and it's just almost like, in a little way, like flying.
For us, it's going to be a complete match race all the way around. I think it's normally weather-driven, but for us, we're not going to let Maserati, the other boat, get away. It's been a little while since we've been out sort of dusting up with another Mod 70, and yeah, we're going to try and win, if I'm honest.
The fleet here is made up of a massive variety of boats. Professional crews sailing high-powered, dedicated racing machines, all the way to the amateur offshore racer, embracing the Corinthian spirit of adventure, happy to be racing on the very same course as some of the world's best.
There can be little doubt, though, that the favourite for this edition of the Middle Sea Race is the offshore racing thoroughbred Rambler. This team has won this prestigious sprint around the Med an astonishing 5 times. But not only that, they also hold the race record. Rambler 88 was designed to eat up the ocean miles. I mean, what's she like on a course like this? What's it like to sail?
It's a bit of a brute of a boat, that boat. It's pretty powerful, quite dangerous in some conditions, and a lot of wind. We certainly have to be careful, sending guys to the bow and getting things done. And it's reasonably easy to sail in terms of steering it, but crewing it's quite difficult because it's highly loaded, and a lot of times where you're really, you know, sort of hanging on. It's not really set up for short course. It's difficult, especially in light airs, to tack the boat efficiently, but that's just the round the boys type sailing. Once we get free and we can sort of pin our ears back, the boat goes very well and you know, probably sails closer to its rating.
In 2007, the Rambler team set off into the Mediterranean amongst a fleet of 65 race hopefuls. Just 15 boats completed the course. After 47 hours and 55 minutes of racing, they were back in Malta. Race 1 and the race record smashed by an astonishing 16 hours.
The record got set in 2007 because we had decent conditions getting up to Messina. We were going around Stromboli still in lighter conditions in the middle of the night, and then the front came through and the breeze went up to 28 and then 30 and then 35 and then 40 and then 55 finally, and that was survival conditions, and we got the record. But I stress, you can't just have big wind in the second half of the race. You have to have a good start to get, you've got to be around Stromboli in the middle of the night, which we have not done since then.
For the 50th anniversary edition of this legendary race, the fleet will be heading out into a forecast of typical light to fresh northwesterly winds. Heading northeast, a fast sprint towards the southern tip of Sicily sees the fleet converging on the Strait of Messina, the narrow passage separating Sicily from the Italian mainland. Currents through here can be ferocious, but once through, it's a left-hand turn around the northern coast of Sicily and south back to Valletta's Grand Harbour.
With just over 600 nautical miles ahead of them, the boats competing in this year's Middle Sea Race are all set to take on what promises to be a landmark edition. In part 3, the race gets underway and we'll find out just who'll take the win here in this stunning Mediterranean setting.
This month on Mainsail, we're in Malta, which plays host to the start and finish of this year's 50th anniversary of one of offshore sailing's classics, the Middle Sea Race. Steeped in history, it's a Mediterranean bolt hole with its tactically perfect safe haven, the Grand Harbour. And for this reason, it's a place that has been fought over for centuries.
I consider Malta as being on the frontier of Europe, on the frontier of Africa. You've got Greece to the east, you've got North Africa, Libya, full of wheat, to the south, Tunisia, to the west, Spain, France, Sicily, just you know, 6-7 hours of sailing to the north. So all this surrounds this island, and everybody wanted a piece of the action, because if you want to dominate the Mediterranean, you need to dominate Malta. The Grand Harbour has always been the key to Malta. If you control the Grand Harbour, you actually control the island. And once you're controlling the Grand Harbour, you're controlling the Mediterranean.
From the Phoenicians and Carthaginians, North African Aghlabids and Romans, to the Napoleonic forces of France, fleets of invaders have over the centuries passed through here. The threat of attack is far less likely now in the modern era, but the sea and marine industry still have a big role to play in the lives of the island nation's inhabitants.
Everybody and anybody who came to Malta came via the sea. Our food, even today, everything comes from the sea. We have always been dependent on exporting stuff into the island. However, it was also the gateway for us to make money and to communicate with the Mediterranean and the world. I think it's a love-hate relationship. The enemy comes from the sea, however, that's where the money is coming from as well.
This landmark edition of one of the most revered contests in sailing has attracted huge crowds, and they're now lining the harbour for a glimpse of one of the most exciting departures our sport has to offer.
At just over 600 nautical miles, the Middle Sea Race is one of offshore sailing's classic events. And watching the start from the battlements of Valletta's Grand Harbour, it's easy to see why.
130 yachts are taking part, from race-tuned offshore monohulls to thoroughbred racing trimarans and Corinthian crews out for adventure. They're all crammed into the harbour here in Valletta, awaiting the unique experience of this race start.
It's an awkward start, but it is a 600-mile race, and this is only about 3/4 of a mile to get out of harbour. Spectacle for the spectators, but shall we say, heart-stopping moment for the competitors. The sailing conditions are excellent, 15 knots, that's roughly 30 kilometers. It may be a bit bouncy because there are some waves out there, but as they go north, it is due to drop and the waves will not be as high. It's one that they will all enjoy, I'm sure.
7 separate starts get the Rolex Middle Sea Race underway, and it really is a unique atmosphere. The Grand Harbour here in Malta is an absolute cauldron of history, and watching these modern race machines circling the start line in such stunning surroundings is just incredible.
Well, that's it, they're off. This has to be one of the most beautiful and dramatic start lines in sailing.
First off the start line, it's the multi-hull fleet, intent on making it out of the harbour unscathed. Over 100 boats followed, leaving just the final class, the giants of the race, the IRC Class 1 yachts, to make their exit. They're favourites to make it back to Malta first, with 72-foot racing machine Momo looking for her first Middle Sea Race win, and of course race record holder Rambler 88 pursuing her 4th successive line honours victory. Heading northeast towards the island of Sicily, at the very front of the fleet it was the 2 multi-hulls, Maserati and Powerplay, making all the running. Both sailed almost 70 miles in the first 4 hours, but it was at a cost for the Italian boat. Reports of rudder damage were coming from Maserati. Although they resolved to stay in the race, early advantage seemed to be with the race newcomer Powerplay. Behind them, Rambler was making good headway, but she didn't have it all her own way. Momo wasn't giving in to the favourite and stole the lead in the approach to the Messina Strait. It didn't last though, Rambler's more offshore route to the race's big turning point paying dividends as the miles ticked by. The Messina Strait is the stretch of water between the Italian mainland and the island of Sicily, a place of myth and legend. It's here that the Argonauts faced the mighty whirlpools and mythology's great sea monster. But for our fleet, there were few travails. Italian multi-hull Maserati led the way through, just an hour ahead of her rival Powerplay, with Rambler and Momo dueling behind as the first night of the race passed without incident. The run back to the safe haven of Malta for the lead boats was a stormy affair, a stiff northwesterly powering them to the finish. And as with all good classic offshores, the first boats to complete the 606-mile course made their way into the Grand Harbour at night.
The boats have been at sea for almost exactly 2.5 days, and we've been following the race on the tracker. It's a beautiful moonlit evening in the Grand Harbour, and we're heading out now to see who's going to come home first.
Creeping in under the cover of darkness, Italian 70-foot multi-hull Maserati was first across the line, in a time of 2 days, 11 hours and 54 minutes.
Well, what a commanding win from Giovanni and his Maserati team. They geared damage early on in the race but they pressed on, got to the front and defended all the way round. First back into Malta. It's an impressive win. A massive congratulations. I mean, that really looked like a heartfelt celebration. What did it mean to get back to Malta first?
And for us it was a very tough race. This night we had a huge storm, very big, and we was able not to break anything and to save the boat and not to lose a lot of time. I'm really happy because you know, was difficult with all the technical issue, but we never give up, and finally we won the race.
It had been a constant battle to hold the lead. Just behind the Italian boat, British multi-hull Powerplay completed their maiden offshore challenge, having pushed Maserati all the way to the line. And just the other side of midnight, after 2 days, 14 hours and 7 minutes at sea, it was Rambler 88 who came home. Without a new race record, but gaining line honours for an event-best 4th successive time.
This is the 4th line honours since 2015, so 15, 16, 17, 18, and also we had one from 2007, so 5 altogether. Helps to have a boat that is on rating and on performance the fastest one in the fleet, so if we don't get line honours, that would be, should we say, embarrassing. And we don't like embarrassments. And of course now we have to deal with all the handicaps, and I think the small boats will prevail in this race.
Of a record entry list, of which for once well over half of the fleet managed to finish, it was indeed one of the smaller boats who claimed the 50th anniversary edition of this dramatic offshore battle. The corrected time trophy for the overall winner of the Middle Sea race was presented the next day to the French 38-foot entrant Courrier Recommande, who had returned home victorious after 3 days, 14 hours and 37 minutes at sea.